Remember when a brand new car cost just $10,000? Dealers packed with bare-bones rides anyone could afford. Now, they're ghosts, vanished overnight. Blame corporate greed? Wrong. These cars didn't die from profits. They got banned by rules you never saw coming. One safety mandate adds $1,000. Emissions tech, another $2K. Stack them up, and poof, cheap cars can't legally exist. Stick around. I'll show how affordable became impossible and why your next ride pays the price.
To answer that, we have to define what a cheap car actually is. It isn't just a low sticker price. It is a product of thin profit margins and a lack of layers. In the automotive world, every additional system is a cost, every sensor is a failure point, and every software update is an engineering hurdle. Today, even the most basic vehicle is an incredibly complex machine made of roughly 30,000 individual parts. Cheap cars don't fail because consumers stop buying them. They fail at the act of compliance. Affordability is not a choice manufacturers make in a vacuum. It is a result of constraints. As regulations scale, fixed costs begin to dominate the price tag. When a single safety mandate adds $1,000 to a vehicle's build cost, that is an invisible bump for a luxury SUV, but it is a death sentence for a budget sedan. This isn't a defense of the industry, but an analytical look at the pressure that a compliance floor puts on the very bottom of the market.
There was a time when cheap cars were a massive, thriving part of the ecosystem. Think of the original Volkswagen Beetle, the early Toyota Corolla, or the bare-bones Citroën 2CV. These cars were viable because the environment they lived in was fundamentally less demanding. In 1950, a car like the Peugeot 203 had only about 50 wires in its entire body. The design was purely mechanical, intended for a world that accepted a high level of personal risk. These cars weren't cheap because the manufacturers were more generous or because the engineering was more efficient. They were cheap because society hadn't yet decided to internalize the costs of accidents and emissions. There were no federal crash tests, no mandatory airbags, and no sophisticated onboard computers managing exhaust fumes. The risks of the machine, from fatal injury rates to local air pollution, were externalized to the user and the public health system. Simplicity worked because the world allowed it to be dangerous, but that tolerance no longer exists.
Modern regulations have established what we call a compliance floor, a non-negotiable baseline of equipment that every street-legal car must have. By 2012, federal safety standards alone had already added nearly $2,000 and 171 pounds of weight to the average passenger car. This floor includes everything from electronic stability control to advanced airbags and tire pressure monitoring systems. Take the backup camera mandate that took effect in 2018. It was a vital safety move intended to save hundreds of lives, but it effectively required every new car to have a high-resolution display in the dashboard. That single rule killed the era of the simple blank plate radio. These costs are fixed. They don't get smaller just because the car does. If a sensor suite costs $500 to manufacture, it represents a 5% price increase on a $10,000 car, but only a 1% increase on a $50,000 one. The math is brutal. Cheap cars are disproportionately punished by the cost of safety. You cannot meet modern safety and emissions rules with a simple machine, and you cannot build a complex machine for a simple price.
From a business perspective, the budget segment has become a trap. Manufacturers face a margin disparity that's nearly impossible to overcome. While a full-size pickup truck might command a profit margin of 10 to 15%, a subcompact car often operates at 5% or less. For a company to make the same amount of profit, it has to sell a massive volume of cheap cars compared to a handful of mid-tier SUVs. Then there is the issue of federalization. If a company wants to bring an affordable car from an emerging market, like the European Dacia Duster, to the United States, it has to undergo a massive re-engineering process. To meet local crash and emission certification, you have to add structural reinforcements, extra airbags, and specific lighting. Executives have noted that federalizing a vehicle can push the price of an $18,000 crossover up to $26,000 before you even open a single dealership. At that point, the affordability is gone, the margin has collapsed, and manufacturers simply exit the segment to focus on the vehicles people are actually willing to finance.
Nostalgia often leads us to believe we can just strip away the technology to save money. We hear proposals to remove the screens or let buyers choose to skip the safety features. But this ignores the reality of modern liability and infrastructure. A brand new, stripped-down $10,000 car would be wickedly uncompetitive against a 5-year-old used car that offers better safety, comfort, and status for the same price. More importantly, society demands protection. Statistical data shows that since the mid-90s, the odds of death in a crash have dropped by over 50% due to these complex mandates. We also have to contend with things like the footprint rule and fuel economy standards, which perversely allows larger vehicles to hit lower efficiency targets. This regulatory loophole actually incentivizes manufacturers to make cars bigger and heavier just to stay legal. If a company tries to stay small and simple, the rules punish them with higher engineering costs. Society has decided that the unreasonable danger of a simple car is no longer an acceptable trade-off for a low price.
We didn't actually lose the cheap car. We just stopped subsidizing it with our health and our safety. The $10,000 cars of the past were only affordable because they were allowed to emit 13 grams of pollutants per mile and offer almost zero protection in a rollover. Today's vehicles are 98% cleaner and exponentially safer than their ancestors. We have traded the low sticker price for a massive reduction in hospitalizations, lost productivity, and environmental damage. The disappearing cheap car is a sign that we have finally priced in the consequences of our transportation. Reliability and safety have shifted from something you manage with a wrench and a prayer to something the system manages for you through sensors and code. The $20,000 car of today is fundamentally a more advanced, durable, and cleaner machine than the $10,000 car of 20 years ago. So the final question isn't about greed or even about engineering. It is about our collective values. If we truly want those ultra-cheap cars to return, which of these protections are we willing to give up?